Hello.
Hey, Marina. Wasn't sure if we were going to have a meeting today or not, but I figured I would check in.
Yeah. And then I'll be around next week or so, but we can probably cancel if I'm the only one.
Yeah. I was saying it less in terms of just December timeframe, more just I didn't see anything on the agenda. And
that's because I forgot
sure.
the agenda. That's also true.
No, so I just wasn't sure if you had stuff you want to chat about or not.
I'll do that right now in the 2 minutes.
Sure.
Nothing major. So
I was kind of looking over the one poor request you've got there.
Yeah.
And Trishak says he is running late. So that might mean he wants to show up.
Yeah, so we'll give it a minute. That's the only thing I have. Cool.
Yeah, so timestamps and snapshots coming along, looks like.
Yeah, I just went ahead and did it as a CLI thing just to kind of get the functionality, and then I could either actually write the web service or leave that for the folks who are going to be actually running the web services. I'm not sure which of those is better.
I'm thinking set up to be a web service, and then whether or not that gets pulled into whatever is running this registry or run separately, either way works.
Because it even be something as simple as like a cron job on some machine that's running that could just run that timestamp command periodically. I guess snapshot's a little more complicated, but
yeah, it's updating the snapshot that I'm worried about. That's kind of the hard part.
Yeah, that's true. I guess timestamp is kind of easy; it just has to run, but snapshot has to because you want to authenticate the people who are updating it, which is actually something that in this PR I kind of have as a to-do. So yeah.
That's all over my code too. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm bored, and I'm never bored, but whenever I'm going through some of my code, I'm like, okay, all this stuff I need to update in here. I'm like, oh, and I had all these like half dozen to-dos I need to come back to as well. So
yeah, every now and then I just grab a project I'm working on for the to-dos. I'm like, oh, this is all the thing. Yeah.
It's my excuse for when things aren't working. Yeah, that's a future requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Make it work.
Yep.
I've also on my own stuff been going through. I've got my reg client that includes reg sync and a couple other commands there. And I'm including right now some stuff for the image copy to include when we got those digest tags to be able to copy those across. And so I'm thinking along the lines of what's going on in Tough and if there's anything that I might need to potentially add in there to support that kind of copying as well in terms of grabbing other metadata from over there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the biggest one is just copying the delegated targets metadata, like the actual signature one, and then basically updating the top level Tough metadata to point to wherever it actually is.
To whatever that new pointer, wherever it's going to be.
That's actually something I should probably do soon on this as well, is make some kind of copy commit to kind of show how that would happen.
It's easy enough to have someone else do it for you if it's just standard stuff in a registry. So
yeah,
if you're overloaded with all this stuff to do, I can, it's easy enough to throw something like that in my own side.
Okay, yeah, because I think that the registry stuff I'm not super worried about. I'm sure there are ways to copy things in the existing
Yeah.
APIs, but it's, and then
a bunch of us have written them. So
yeah. And then, but I think the question is just like the additional work of what you do with the tough stuff when you do that.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's where I had a little bit of that for the digest tags, because they're a little different, but there's standardized enough that I can just make it an option and say, okay, whenever you see that, go ahead and copy it over, as long as someone passes this flag. And so if we've got a standard for, okay, whenever you see this flag that says copy the tough stuff, know to go over and look at these places for the tough data and copy that over as well. It's easy enough to add a few of those things. How's it going there, Steve?
Pretty good. Caught up with the videos yesterday, so
I saw that.
Those links.
I'm going to have a lot of spinning in the morning to do while watching videos. I'll work up a good sweat going through all those videos.
Well, you were here for most of them. I don't think you missed it.
I think there are a few back, going way back. I'm like, I missed a couple there that I want to catch up on. Usually if I see myself in the video, I just fast forward right through it. I'm like, okay, I was in that one. I will, since we're giving Trishanka a second here, I will mention, Steve, just on the hack MD that we were talking about with the registry fallback stuff, just because I'm probably not on the same page you are, just mentally, I'm just not quite following every detail you want. If you just want to take a whole copy of that markdown and make it look exactly like what you want to, just go all the way through the finished product. And that way we can just say, here's the final goal of what we're trying to get to. I think that would be a lot easier, at least for me.
Yeah, I was trying to not create yet another, and I didn't want to. I mean, part of the problem is I haven't been able to carve out the time. So it was great that you got it started. That's why I was just trying to provide some feedback so you could keep on iterating. I mean, does that latest template that I stuck in there make sense? Or
the template does, but I feel like we've been in enough discussions where you've said, okay, it's not just the formatting, it's the overall goals and details in there, what we're going through that need to be changed. And so just whatever you're thinking of, just go ahead and just grab a whole copy of it and just make it look exactly like what you're thinking of. And that way.
All right, maybe I'll try to take a quick stab at it today, because mostly it's pasting in what you had and then adding a couple of things. And then so at least, but I think rather than start focusing on what solutions matches, like let's spend some time discussing those requirements. Like, because somebody might feel it's not as important compared to somebody else that might be important for one reason versus another. Yeah. It might be like, we don't need this in, like, I think we have to figure out what do we want to cover in the fallback scenario versus the non-fallback scenario too. I think that'll help in some sense of the rankings. So we can say, look, there is a reason why there's a fallback versus whatever the right solution is. And where is that?
We're definitely going to get people that just say, okay, these are my requirements and they're different than your requirements. And so everybody's going to rank it a little differently. And so finding consensus is going to be extremely difficult, but hopefully at least we can have a common language and know where each individual group's deal breakers are.
And if people vote on a weighted ranking system.
Well, I don't think so. So it'll be that too, right? I mean, but I also think it'll be, I think that it'll flush out a little bit of what, like, line 6.5 might not be important to me, but it's easily supported in X. So like, hey, so it's great. Like, it's not like it's an anti, it's more of like, it's just not that important. Where somebody else might feel something else is really important. And as long as we can get it into, the fallback versus the other, I don't know. It kind of assumes an end result. And I think that's part of what I'm trying to avoid is let's capture what it is we're trying to achieve. But I think the main thing that we talked about, Brandon, was that it wasn't just limited to what we want to support in fallback. It's like, let's cover the whole breadth. Like, what are we trying to do with reference types? And then like list those. And then we could say, all right, we can knock off 6 out of 10, 9 out of 10. It's 9 out of 10 and the 10th not important, then like we're done. I don't think that's the case, obviously, but we should start there.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that there are any X's in that diagram, and I don't think they exist if we had the full reference type final solution there, that's kind of the case where fallback is non-ideal, but at least
I think there's still a reason we need references, right? If we find a perfect fallback,
Yeah.
then, you know.
Yeah, no, it's just a bandwidth problem, right? It's like, where is this live in the party list? Because when I was talking to Samir and folks, and they're like, of all the things we need to prioritize, like we wanted to talk about policy management, for instance. That's probably one. We were talking about a couple of things, like one of the next priorities now that we have the extension model kind of landing, or at least, landing is a base that we'll iterate on. Is it revocation or policy? And the thought process is the policy is actually pretty tightly coupled to revocation. So let's get the policy pieces in place. Was the next, kind of the next prioritization piece.
I think seeing Shank's comment there, he looks like maybe like he's wishfully hoping another 5 to 10 minutes from now.
Okay, yeah, maybe we should just go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
It sounds like he double booked himself, which is fine.
Yeah.
These things happen.
I'm gonna
Okay.
shut off my video just so I could eat and stuff.
Yeah.
Sleep.
Yeah, not a ton for today, just kind of a check-in. I think the only thing on this repo that I did this week is this timestamp and snapshot CLI PR, which is it's actually some of the stuff in here is actually duplicate from other things, because I wrote a lot of helper functions as part of the delegation PR, which is not merged. So I copied those here, which is not the correct way to do that. I should factor them into a third PR, but anyway. So it looks like a big PR. It's actually not that big. It's mostly adding 2 different commands to do snapshot and timestamp, which just call the GoTough snapshot and timestamp with a tiny bit of helper stuff in there. Yeah, I think the big thing here and we kind of started talking about this earlier, is the biggest issue with this PR is in the snapshot. What it does right now is it downloads the tough metadata that's on the repository and doesn't download delegated targets, and then just says, make a snapshot using that, which is doing no verification of those things except the fact that it's on the registry. And I think it'd be much better for the snapshot to actually know, like, this is the correct version. And I know this because, the person that controls the correct key told me that, especially for the delegated targets, because that's kind of where we want that to be happening. So I think when writing a process to do this, like some kind of web server or whatever, that'll be the biggest design piece there, is figuring out that authentication. And I don't want to invent authentication, but making sure that we use we do it correctly.
Yeah. Which way does that auth go? Because we're going to pull an image. We're going to then pull the signature for that image. Correct. And so then we come back to Tough and say, is this really a valid signature at that point? And then does it go root delegated or root?
Yeah. So the issue is we need to know that it's the correct image right now, right? Because the whole issue is that if the user can figure out just based on without snapshot that the signature is valid, we wouldn't need it. But what the snapshot gives you is, say, I am a person uploading a thing to the registry. I signed something, I upload it, and then a week later I decide I want to not have that signature anymore, but then sign this other thing and be attesting to that instead. I want to be able to communicate to the snapshot process, okay, to no longer include this old metadata that I validly signed, include this new one that I validly signed. In case that's some kind of message, sign that with my key and say, this, and a timestamp or something, and say, do this now instead.
So if you've got that low level signature and you come back up and you try to find the snapshot, do you go root snapshot and then find all the delegations, or do you go from the signature up and say, okay, let me find this in the snapshot and then verify the snapshots in the root? Which direction you walk that tree, I guess.
Yeah, so it's the way in Tough, you kind of do it top down entirely. In this version, you do kind of both directions, because the easiest way to discover the signatures on the registry, right, is you have the object, you do the thing, you find the signatures on that, and then you go to the top level root, you make sure that it use the correct key to sign it, and that the version of that metadata matches the version listed in Snapshot. So Snapshot doesn't actually include all it really has is a version number of the metadata that you signed. So say for the Wabbit Networks repo, we just have one signature in there, which is probably an oversimplification. It starts at version 1, continues. So at the very beginning, the snapshot will list, Wabbit Networks version 1. And then when I want to change what's signed in the Wabbit Networks repo, I then replace that metadata, call it version 2, tell snapshot, use version 2 now. And then, because that way, even if version 1 is still on the registry, like it's never garbage collected or whatever, people would know that it's old.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can even it's still valid, right? So if for some reason the user wants to ignore snapshot, they can say this, this used to be valid or whatever.
They can still pull the old one. It's just,
yeah. As long as it's not deleted, which is just an implementation choice, they could choose to pull the old one and ignore the fact that the person didn't want you to use it, which might be valid.
As long as it doesn't have log4j in it.
Yeah.
What was that?
As long as it doesn't have log4j in it. I don't know if you've been watching the security explosion on Twitter today, Steve.
Yeah. I think it's just a matter of we also talk about deleting stuff in MCR, even things that are no longer in support. So old versions of Windows, old versions of .NET, or whatever the other 1,000 images are there.
And if you have
a policy, customers still use them. I mean, travel internationally, and you'll see a Windows 98 point of sale system sitting there.
Yeah, I think in a slightly less simplified model, you can even have a piece of tough metadata that lists both the current image and an older image that you're still supporting or whatever. It doesn't have to be literally one image. It's just that this is the current metadata, right? This is the current set of things that I'm citing.
Right.
But you can still, a user might still want to ignore that. And
some of this may come into whatever our web service for snapshot looks like in terms of I, as a signer, say I'm going to sign the latest version 4 of whatever our image is, and I push it up to snapshot. If we tell snapshot to add something in there, does that implicitly delete the previous one, or do we just want to say until you explicitly delete it, we'll go ahead and sign all of them?
Yeah, I mean, there might be a reason you'd want to download an old snapshot to say, what was valid at this time. I think that,
and it's not always downloaded. Sometimes it's validating. So you might have a snapshot you've pulled a week ago and you just want to say, hey, let me make sure it's still signed. And because when you do a scale up, you don't necessarily want that delay of, okay, I'm scaling up, let me go out to the registry and, 15 nodes all of a sudden hit the registry simultaneously and you're waiting 15 minutes for your service.
Yeah, and I think that the snapshot, at the very least, it can be, what's it called? It can be batched, so that it's only updated every 5 minutes, minute. I don't know the scale that we want to do that at. But yeah, and I think, and maintaining, I think at least one old one, so that while this one's being uploaded, you can still access this one, and stuff like that is important. There's kind of some other work I'm doing to try and make the snapshot more efficient, just generally, because I think listing, every single tough metadata file and the version can get big, even though it's still, it's just 2 things, but it can still get big. But I think for now, it'd be easiest to just, do it that way and then improve it, basically, instead of waiting on all that. Yeah.
Hey there, Trishank. We kind of jumped on without you.
Hey, sorry guys, I was late. Yeah, conflicting meeting.
Story of all our lives.
Jamming in stuff before the end of the year.
Yeah, what's new?
I was talking about timestamp snapshot, mostly snapshot, and how to make that process. What
cool. I'm so glad you raised it, because something that we're very quickly we need to try to solve a data doc, because we're building our own internal version of TUF for signing container images, right? But of course we obviously want to be able to switch that with NV2 TUF as soon as it's ready. But the thing we're really thinking about is how do we scale snapshot, as you might know, your ongoing work with
yeah.
Sorry, his name slips me now. Could you please
Zach,
remind me?
yeah.
Zach, there we go. Yeah. We need to investigate all of the different options that we were talking about for scaling snapshot. So
yeah, I think so what I'm proposing for now is that I definitely think we're going to need some of those scalability solutions, but I'd rather finish doing, again, that work I'm doing to make sure that we pick the right way to scale it. Just, that's the whole thing I'm working on there, right? Is, I don't know, for some context, I don't know how much I've talked about all this is basically, instead of having that list of metadata file version number, we're looking at breaking it into some kind of cryptographic data structure like a Merkle tree, possibly a Merkle tree, possibly something like one. So you can download less stuff and still get that information. But so I'm working on finding evidence about whether that's more efficient, when it's more efficient, kind of those kind of things. And I think it will be, at least in some cases. Like, for example, for Docker Hub, which is kind of the motivation for this whole work, right? Where you could potentially have millions of different, lines of that. The metadata could kind of get kind of big.
My hope on Docker Hub, the reason I'm hemming and hawing there, is that there's not going to be one snapshot for the entire Docker Hub. There's going to be probably a snapshot and a root for the Docker library, everything, all the official images, and then probably some of the trusted images. But then once you get out into each individual user's repo, hopefully that turns into, okay, if you're going to do something signed on there, you're going to have to maintain your own root.
Yeah, and I think that especially in the short term, right? Because that's why I'm comfortable moving ahead with this without 100% solving that problem, right? Is that as people get started doing this, they'll have, they'll start with one thing and then they'll go up from there. It won't start with every single person actually signing their stuff.
Oh, that's very interesting, Brandon. I hadn't even considered that proposal before, but I think we can do it in a way where we still reuse, say, the root keys, for example. But then Docker would say, you get your own timestamp and snapshot key, and you're responsible for it. That's
I guess that's true, right? So you can even take advantage of the. And the other thing you can do is list multiple timestamp keys with a threshold of 1, right? And say, or snapshot keys, threshold of 1.
Oh, so either Docker or you can do it. I see. Yeah. Very interesting.
You can pick either of those solutions, depending.
Because the thing that's missing today is that, yes, with Docker Content Trust V1, you essentially have, everyone has their own repo, but unfortunately key management there just doesn't scale. So
yeah, and the V1, it was every single repo was its own root. And I think we've been looking at it of saying, okay, let's go the complete opposite direction. Let's make the entire Docker Hub a root. And I think the right place is somewhere in the middle there, where it's, each organization is a root within Docker Hub. And so you might have an organization with a dozen repos on Hub, but it's not the entire Docker Hub. So
I also think the trust model makes more sense there, right? I don't necessarily trust every person who's allowed to upload to Docker Hub. Or even if I do, I don't necessarily want to download all those things. So.
Yeah, makes sense. You don't want Docker. Docker probably doesn't have the, doesn't want to, I'd want to talk for on behalf of them, but probably doesn't want to get into the business of delegating keys to the orgs.
They probably don't want to, they probably don't want to be at the very least liable for you installing vulnerable images. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of the plan. The main problem that we're talking about today, and I think we mostly have an idea of how to do this, is just to make sure that the snapshot process has a way to kind of authenticate who is telling them what versions and kind of keeping that info around.
So with snapshot, if you did as a Merkle, all you have to really do is sign the top snapshot and say, okay, here it is. And then if everything below that is content addressable, you don't have to sign each individual thing. You just have to sign that one thing at the top.
Yeah, and they're secure hashes, right? Which is, it's all fine.
And so if it's hashed, content addressable, go in that direction. And we're doing that on the snapshot for the stuff you're doing over on the tough side. Putting that into a registry goes very nicely because everything in the registry is content addressable and that same structure.
Yeah, that's part of what's nice about that proposal, right? Is that they're already hashed. So
yeah. So I guess the challenge that I'm mentally thinking of is does there need to be some method to know which one of those content addressable chunks you need to pull next? Because that's where you get your efficiency, is you only pull one of those children, not all the children, to find the right thing in there.
The way I kind of, I have a proof of concept of this somewhere is, I can find a link to that, is basically it in the, I think it's in the timestamp is where I put it. It has it kind of has a path of how you find the different metadata files. And obviously that, and then you verify that path, right? So you make sure that this actually goes up to the same thing. And you kind of need to do this anyway, right? Because you need to know the neighbors that you're hashing in order to get up the tree. So
yeah, that'll be interesting to look at. So
Yeah, let me pull that up. It's
I didn't mean to give you work, but
oh no, I did write this concept somewhere. I think I have it somewhere. Snapshot tree. I wrote it a little while ago, so it might be.
is that over in GoTough or just in the main Tough repos?
So yeah, part of why I'd have to move this to GoTough, and even this Python Tough one, I'd probably have to refactor because I wrote it a while ago. But
yeah, when you put it into a registry, all those digests are going to be registry digests at that point, and so things might change because you're going to have manifest wrapping.
Yeah, there's probably a more efficient way to do this directly with registries too. If we go this path. Yeah, instead of basically, otherwise you'd end up hashing twice. You hash it on the Tough side and then hash it on the registry side, which seems wrong.
The actual data itself, that can be a blob. That would be the same hash. There's just going to need to be an extra hash on top of that to wrap the blob with a manifest. And
yeah, so I guess the leaves would basically be the same. We'd still hash those, put them in a thing, and then double hash that. But then the what's the
whatever your top layer,
the non-leaf nodes.
The root node at that point, but I think root is already taken in the tough land.
The root's the top one. There's definitely a word. Anyway, those nodes we could use registry stuff for.
Yeah, when you're thinking about the registry logic in there, it is the image, aka it's just image everywhere inside of the OCI, although they do call it artifact, but artifacts just says use the image definition. That's what contains the blobs, and then on top of that, you've got the OCI index that can contain other images. So when you go one layer up, you're going to have image, and if you need to have more layers on top of that, you just make it an index.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's the kind of step. That's the future goal, right? For this process is to make it more efficient like that. Because I think theoretically you could then put all of Docker Hub into one. I don't know. It depends on what you want to do, or even just all of Microsoft, right? Microsoft probably has enough things that they might want something like that. I don't know. It's probably all private, but
when you're measuring efficiency. When you're measuring efficiency, what are you looking at? Are you looking at like assuming a bandwidth of X? How long does it take to download everything with the round trips, or what kind of?
Yeah, so that's part of the reason this analysis isn't finished, right? So the idea is to actually simulate uploads and downloads, because there's both the update time of the data structure and the amount of data that the user is downloading, and you want to make sure that the data structure can be uploaded fast, efficiently enough that for the number of times people are uploading, it can actually finish loading at some point, right? So users can download it. You can do some batching, but still has to finish within, less than a minute and all of that for these really big sizes, in order to be useful. So
makes sense.
So I was thinking about this while you were talking about it, because it really comes back to the streaming updates of, I want to make sure I get the most current, and we've talked about I may not want the most current, but in the tagging scheme, there's isn't necessary because it doesn't follow semantic versioning. It's hard to tell, but so in some ways this can be helpful. I've just been thinking about how can what is the differentiator for Tough and how it's, where you would add the Tough metadata in a particular image or a particular artifact on the registry. And what I was wondering is for the customers that do want a streamed update, where they know that however the scheme is, that, X, Y, Z, X1, X2, X3, whatever the scheme is they use, that this would be the flag they could set that I actually do want the updates. Because when I think about the in-car updates, stuff that you're doing, or there was some Google device or some sort. So basically where the company owns the streamed updates to a device that a consumer has, not just a consumer, a user has. In that case, the user shouldn't have a choice per se in picking it. I don't want to get into the semantics of whether they should be updates. They opt in for updates. Let's just say that
and then they opt in for like whatever the company wants or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, they could freeze the update, but they can't go cherry pick, whatever.
And that's actually one of the biggest design differences of Uptane and Tough. Like Uptane uses Tough concepts to do this, but it does have specific things for directing updates versus, the user of like an operating system or whatever requesting an update. It's like it goes the other way, right? The car company's like, you are a car, this is the update that you need.
Because I just think it gives you it starts to differentiate and give the specific value to why I would use this. Like when you really do want, and like just if you want to pause update, that's fine. But as soon as you resume, you are getting the next one.
And that's definitely something that you could add on to Tough in registries. I think that, and it also depends a little bit on how you use the Tough metadata. Like for example, so you could choose to sign, all of the images that you upload, right? You say like, we uploaded all of these images over the past 5 years and we uploaded them, take your pick. And you could sign that with Tough metadata, you could verify it, and you would know that this is the current set of things that this company has on their registry. You could also choose to use the Tough metadata to say, this is the most current image. I'm going to invalidate all my previous signatures basically and say, this is the one I'm signing. You could choose to use other stuff, but I'm not signing it. And you can even probably do something in between those two where you do both of those things and you tell people to use the one that they care about.
But that's where it's true a little bit. So if you take a stream of updates, that's very straightforward, right? But if I have, I'll use .NET for example. There's I don't even know the versions anymore, but whatever, there's 3, 4, and 5, let's say major versions. And each one of those major versions has releases that you're doing. Some customers can't go to 5 yet because it has something, so they need to be in 4. Is there a way that this,
the Python 2 problem, right?
Okay, yeah. I guess the Python frameworks have the same, Java and so forth. Like any major runtime has this problem. How do you segment that? Does it have to be a separate repo, or can you keep in the same repo? And
you could choose to keep it in the same repo and include basically the delegated metadata that's either in one piece of metadata or in 2. Mostly doesn't matter. That signs both. Here's the current version of 4. Here's the current version of 5. And you as a user have to kind of make an informed. You have to choose to pull the latest version of 5, right? And not. So
you do have the concept of the latest of a subsection, so to speak.
Well, I mean, I think latest was maybe a bad use of the term, right? This is the.
I'd say newest. I mean, but what I'm getting at is there's 4.0.1.3. There's 4.0.1.4, right? So in that case, if I want the newest of 4, that's what I want. But if I'm on 5, I want the newest of 5 as well, for another stream, but it's in the same repo.
Because you as a user of the registry are still making a choice about what you choose to download. So basically all we're adding on top of that is whether or not there is a currently valid signature on the thing you're choosing to download. You might change your mind about what you're choosing to download because there's not a valid signature on it, right? But you as the user are still the one, you still have agency to make that choice.
And is this something we can also make configurable on terms of whatever that little web service is, where the web service can say, okay, they're pushing a new version of 4. Let's at this point overwrite and update the snapshot so that there are no other versions of 4, and this is the only version of 4, versus other people might say, we don't need that. We want all the versions. And so they just put a different flag on their web service that just keeps them all until explicitly deleted.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way. That's a good idea, a good way to design that. So basically it decides whether to replace the old one or just add a new one and keep the old one. Maybe with another thing to delete an old one at some point when they decide to. Because it really comes back to what someone is trying to, what semantic meaning someone is trying to convey with the signature. And I don't think there's like a broad consensus about exactly what that's, like there's the easy one, which is that I signed this thing, therefore, it was uploaded by me. But there's, I think, a step beyond that some people want and some people don't want. This is based on my understanding of all this, is that, I actually attest to this. Like, I think you should use this. And I don't know which of those models.
You should use this versus a different version of the same.
Yeah, versus a different thing, right? because the question is like, so do we want signing to be able to, so say if there's a vulnerability that is discovered in an image, it's a choice basically whether you say, well, I still uploaded that image, it's still a valid image, or if you say, I don't sign this anymore. And I think there's, I mean, even if you don't do that, right, you gain something from, if someone else manages to upload something, you didn't sign it, therefore it's automatically invalid.
You want the immediate, like it wasn't, that's not Marina's signature, so I discount it completely.
Yeah. And that one, I think any model will give you that much protection. But the question is if people want that other thing. And
the forwarding thing, is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah.
The big value of adding tough to our design to me is the ability to go back and say, I've signed this before, but I no longer want to trust this. And so Log4j came out today. I now want to just go out there and remove all of my approvals for things that have that in there. And
exactly.
That's how I keep track of it.
And maybe this is done by like not the uploader, but by somebody else who's like, copying it into a new registry. You're like, well, I copied this into my registry like a year ago, and I probably don't want to, if I was doing this today, I wouldn't have copied that over. So I want to delete that signature. Because I don't think we're going to commit people to like,
Sorry, go ahead.
I think the problem of old things existing on the registry, I don't think is something we can or will solve here. I don't even know that we want to, right? I think there's some historical value to that, but I don't know that people should be running it in production. And maybe they should at least be able to have the choice to know that they're running it in production,
There's a piece that I struggle with a lot is like, it's the delegation of duties, right? It's knowing it still came from, Web networks, that it's still valid. It still came from, there was a vulnerability discovered in it. It turns out the way I run my software, I'm not exposed to it. Or I am, but it's not that big a deal. And it's more important to keep the service running. So let me go fix it and I'll deploy it in a couple of hours. So
I think my biggest thing is that I think that you should make that decision, right? I think maybe like the
you should be informed about it and be able to make it. But the thing is, when those come up, is it really Web Networks that actually knows the problem, or it was discovered outside and the security scanners? That's what I mean by the delegation of duties, right? Like, it's not the signing; it's the security scanners that like, I know that there's a problem. I've done the analysis. Now I know that any container image that has this digest, because it's the base image, but not the base image, whatever. It actually is the net monitor software. A particular release of it is impacted by this, and the others aren't.
Yeah, I mean, so I think maybe that's the model that will make the most sense. I don't know that we want to prescribe this for people, but I think this is a reasonable model, would be that the person uploading it just signs all the things that they uploaded. They say, at one point, I thought this was good. I'm uploading it. It came from me. And then if you're copying that into your private environment before it actually goes into deployment, you then decide, okay, like, this is the version that we want to do for these reasons. And you can change your mind about that in the future. You sign a set of those things to your private repo or whatever. And that's the metadata that you verify when you're deploying.
And then obviously it's after it's deployed too, right? Because it was fine on Monday, and you discover on Wednesday the thing was running as bad. So you don't want to just yank the signature. I don't think. I think you want your scanners to know that there's a problem with this. It still came from Web Networks, right? There's a very difference between Brandon steals the key and is now maliciously signing software on your behalf versus he messed up. Or Marina messed up and she ships some software with a bug in it. It's like, oops. Yeah, I
think maybe the answer is that we want to do both those things, but at different levels, right? So if Brandon's key is stolen, we want to invalidate at that level, right? At that original upload level, you say, oh no, there's something wrong here. Yeah. Versus if the package just turns out to have this really bad bug, it's still a valid package, but you who are actually deploying it want to say, okay, we're not going to sign that.
That's the policy I set up in my environment. Well, one is a global policy, like the scanners ship up, that there's a vol available, and then you decide whether you care about that vulnerability in your software. Because it turns out that vulnerabilities in all your software. And if you disable running anything as that vulnerability, you can't run any software. So
I read a paper the other day that it was anyway, they had this whole thing, but basically what they found was that over time, I think 100% of packages uploaded to Docker Hub have vulnerabilities that are at some point discovered. So they're all vulnerable. but that's not they're not necessarily all relevant vulnerabilities, right? That's the
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's the thing that was running last month and I'm not running. There's a new version of it now. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
To defend Docker, 100% of VMs are also vulnerable. So.
Yeah, no, it's not like a blame thing. It's just that software has bugs. And we all know that. It's yeah. Yeah.
It's those pesky humans in the process. Cool.
Yep. Yeah, so I think that, and I think those the policy questions, I think we should have advice about the policy questions for sure. I think this is a good thing for us to figure out. But I think in the end, it'll come to how people end up actually using this in practice. So
let's get stuff out so they can use it.
Yeah.
So I was going to throw out, is there anything that you can use from us in terms of double checking, putting an approval on a PR or anything like that that you're looking on? Guess I'll go through the timestamp and snapshot one a little bit here.
Yeah, the actual stuff added there is relatively straightforward, except for the fact that I have a big to-do in snapshot, which is actually verify this, which is obviously important.
Add security here.
Yeah, exactly. Which I clearly need to do. Other than that, I think I'm just trying to finish separating those GoTough PRs, which, I mean, you're welcome to take a look, but those require, I think, a lot more tough background if you would like to spend the time to do that. I don't mind either way. Yeah, otherwise. Oh, I guess one question I do have is, do you have an example of one of those extensibility web service things for, what was it, for the OCI?
For OCI, extensibility might be on your side, Steve, in terms of thinking of the next version of Notary under the extension proposal.
Oh, I guess, there's that's actually another good question. I was actually referring to to make the timestamp and snapshot service. There was I think I have this open still.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think you need to start with what's in OCI just yet, just because that's going to be changed to the forking registry and all that good stuff. Just make sure that your code can work within that model in general. And so It's just throw up a web service, make sure you're just accepting parameters on some kind of endpoint out there. And the arguments are probably just going to be, add a snapshot, delete a snapshot, and that, I don't know if there's anything else.
And I guess the question you thought I asked is also a good question about getting this to interoperate with kind of the Notary v2 work. And I think that basically it'll just be a matter of adding kind of a layer to, when uploading to the registry, to using Notary v2 to do the signature layer of that. Basically, we use the same stuff, but upload it using that. So it's just a translation layer, if I understand correctly.
So the question I should have answered earlier, and did a poor job of answering, now we've gotten off on this tangent, but it was, instead of saying Notary, I should have said reference types, because we've got the reference type extending registry, and we're thinking of using the extension proposal for that. So it might already be done over there. I don't know if you've got that done yet on your side, Steve, or not.
Which stuff?
Changing the reference type implementation of the registry fork to use the extension.
It hasn't landed yet. We're still there's
still back and forth. Okay.
Yeah, we have to have something. We have to change what we have, because it's we didn't recognize that when people stand up registries on their own Kubernetes cluster, that namespace, the V2 namespace they need, because that's what they have a path for access to. As hosted registries, we don't have that problem, because customers are configure that whole domain. That is one of the things that we've surfaced. That's why we're looking to get that resolved. Yeah.
So no example for you yet, Marina, but that might be the first one when it does exist.
Where does she host the extra endpoint, you're saying?
So that's the first part. Now the second part, I think the Marina was just getting to, was how can we integrate this in Notary in general? So that is a good question.
Yeah, I think probably, I mean, at this point, probably the best time to do the demo would be in January when everyone is back, because the next week might be hit and miss. But hopefully by then I'll have a full demo of, here's how you upload stuff to Tough, copy it to another registry, all this stuff works, and then we can figure out how to integrate that back into the other work.
Does this make sense, Steve? We've got some of the command line, we're talking about plugin interfaces for signing on what's going on in notation. Does it make sense to have the flexibility to add something there that says, okay, push this, get the signature, and it will also push this thing over to Notary or to Tufts that says, here's a new snapshot that you should approve? This might also get to that chaining question.
I was actually hoping we wouldn't have to do something like that, because that's, basically you want to say, I want to work with this key management system versus this other key management system. The idea wasn't that you would use it because you're trying to do a different formatting of a signature. It'd just be a different pivot. I'm hopeful that we can, once we get to, a point where it kind of meets our goals, that we can just merge it into the normal notation CLI. Maybe you enable a flag because the behavior does something different. But even that flag, I would hope would be, short term. It would be because there's some problem with it that we haven't resolved yet.
I think there's a pretty reasonable incremental solution, basically, which is to make, because the delegated targets metadata is basically just a signature. It maps, I think, pretty closely to a signature in notation. We might have to do something to make them look a little bit more similar, but I think that's easy enough. And then basically on top of that, we add the top level tough stuff and the stuff that gives you.
Yeah, the short term, I'm thinking you can just do the signing using Tufts, which then calls Notary, grabs all of that, and then does this thing on the Tufts side again. So you're just kind of like this intermediate wrapper around Notary.
Yeah.
So that would be short term, easy solution. Medium term might be looking at, does it make sense to add another plugin interface on top of what's going on in the notations code? In terms of, we've got plugins for the key management, sign and verify. Maybe there needs to be some other plugin that's just a pre and a postscript kind of thing. I don't know what makes the most sense. And then long term would be a direct integration over there.
Yeah.
And someone might nix one or the other.
Yeah, I'm sure if we brought that up in the bigger group, there'd be a lot of opinions about it.
Yeah. Because once we start saying plugins over there, I'm sure someone's going to be like, I don't know if I want to add a plugin. So we'll see.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a balance between making it customizable, but also making it easy to use. I think if you go too far the plugin route, it can just be so annoying to set up that people kind of give up.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm hopeful. The reason we're doing plugins for key vault providers is if Microsoft needs to ship new functionality or fix a bug that we don't want to disclose to anybody, or Trishank, well, maybe not Trishank's a better, there's another key vault provider, HashiCorp. I'll just use HashiCorp. They haven't come out yet. That's a new company and they want to write a new key vault management systems and they want to do a big splash. Yeah. They shouldn't have to have any conversation with us whatsoever to be able to enable that. Yeah. A new signing format, that seems very different. I think Notary should be able to support a set of signing formats, whatever those are. Hopefully it's one that evolves, and you shouldn't have to plug something in just to validate the signature.
So I guess where my logic is going is I'm thinking, does it make sense to have a pre and a post sign set of plugin hooks? And the pre sign would be, let me go out and make sure I really should be signing this thing before I sign it. And so it does some kind of validation on this thing that I'm about to sign. Does it pass whatever, was there an actual security scan that ran on this thing before I kick the sign off?
Before you didn't calling notation sign?
I mean, you should, but I'm just wondering, would users find a use case in there to have that built right in? And then the post would be kind of what Marina's looking at of, okay, I've done my signature. I've pushed this thing up there. Let me go and call the post hook. And that would be the tough chance to say, okay, let me go ahead and update the tough metadata. So
yeah, but I'm saying for the second part, what I'm saying is if we want that function, when that functionality comes into notation, I don't know what the user would do differently, why it needs to be a separate API. Maybe it's a flag you set, but it shouldn't. The last thing I would want is to have yet another binary you have to install. I'm already having angst around, you have to download 2 binaries just to make these things work, the notation and then the key vault provider.
So your push is just make everything server binaries and just call them in a chain. call them in a shell script or something like that.
No, what I'm actually saying is ship the tough. Once we have the tough and it's in a point where we feel comfortable, it's just in the notation CLI.
That would be long term, but if users had other use cases outside of that didn't get compiled in, then they should.
What are those use cases? I guess that's the piece
I think that it probably wouldn't, even if they don't use the tough metadata, it wouldn't hurt for it to be on the registry, right? I mean,
or in the client as well. The registry as well. Oh, I see. On the that's the piece that we're waiting to kind of see when this thing stabilizes. If the registry has to host yet another service to do the snap.
Oh, no, not a service. It's basically the way I have it set up now is there's just it adds a repository on the registry that you upload this stuff to, the top level tough stuff.
Okay.
That like and then I guess you do need a service for timestamp snapshot, which I guess could be
that's what I was saying.
You could turn off.
If the registry doesn't support it, then you know. But I think I guess I'm trying to respond to your question, Brandon, of the options. Like,
I think somebody's going to come out with a request that doesn't fit into compiling it directly in a notation, and so one thought is to have it as a plugin. Another thought is just to say, go ahead and build your pipeline that just says that you only do step B after you've done step A, and then you solve that externally. And if you're saying, yeah, solve it externally, that makes sense to me as well. I'm not pressed on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have to see what it is. I mean, it's one of those, like, again, having been through a bunch of these, like working on WPF and then Silverlight, we made options for every possible thing in WPF. And it just became a supportability killer nightmare because we didn't know who was using what. We found bugs. We didn't know whether they could fix them or not. And Silverlight, we took a very different approach. We said, look, if you don't have, first of all, you don't have a justified scenario, we're not even going to add it. And if you do, and you can do it with more composable pieces, that, you know, is there something wrong with that? So it's just taking a much more minimalistic approach. So if there is something, like, we're not shipping this to the moon and can't touch it for 50 years, right? Or Mars or whatever. So when those scenarios come up, we'll add that extensibility or add the functionality or add whatever the hell it is, because we don't know what it is yet.
That makes sense to me. I think it's a very reasonable, practical approach. I also agree that in practice, when we use things like feature flags, it does become a support nightmare.
Yeah, if there was a feature flag here, it would hopefully be temporary, or it'd be, yeah. So, but again, even that, I don't know what the flag would do one way or the other. So let's just keep on cranking and, you know, make it work. If you need a fork of the notation to do this temporarily, fine. Like we had a fork of notation to do the key vault provider stuff. We're trying to get that merged in now, even though it's not complete. We know we're not complete, but we need something to test. And the feedback we got early on is, please don't send me off to different branches and different builds. Like, put it in main, leave it in main, change main, release from main, change main again. So main is always current and you have stable releases. So that's kind of the thought process. So get it to a point, keep cranking, get it to a point.
Branches get tricky because you have to keep them up to date.
You have to what?
Branches are tricky, or branches or forks or whatever version of those you do are tricky because you have to make them continue to sync up with certain things.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it's a temporary thing. Like the releases come up.
Temporary is one thing. You have to have a plan, right? That's the.
Yeah.
All right.
Which makes it interesting is does tough need to be a separate repo? We did it because we didn't know what the hell this thing was going to be when we started.
And I think that I think in order to get this working back in the notation stuff, I want to work more closely with the folks who've been working more on that library to make it all match up. But I think for the proof of concept stuff I'm working on, I think this will be good.
Yeah. Proof of concept, slap anything together.
Exactly.
Sweet. All right.
Cool. Thanks. Anyone else have anything you want to bring up? I think we got through a lot of today, but all right.
More than I thought. I figured it was me like a 10-minute meeting, so more than I thought of going over.
Yeah, had more to talk about. All right, well, thanks everyone. Have a good weekend. Yeah, see you on GitHub.
Thank you. See you. Looking forward to the demo in January.
Yeah, should be good. All right. Bye.
All right, take care.